our speaker for this Friday night of our virtual volunteer lay pastor advance. We're very, very grateful here at Allegheny East Conference to be able to have Elder Jackson Doggett. The Doggett is one of those persons who God has blessed with a multitude of gifts. He not only has served our church with great distinction as a pastor, so he knows the pastor's heart, but he also has trained himself in order to become an even sharper instrument for God's cause by combining his legal skills. He is a licensed attorney as well as a pastor, and these unique gifts place him in a position to be able to make a tremendous contribution to the cause of God and in his service to our conference. He serves as our in-house counsel, also heads up our Department for Social Justice, Religious Liberty, just does an outstanding job with penetrating analysis and great counsel. And I have personally appreciated his contribution. Not only has he been a effective and successful pastor, and now attorney, but he also is an author and has written a really great book on retaining the harvest, a passionate area of interest that he has. And today we are so grateful that he can come and start off our first night this evening in sharing with us some really valuable information on assimilation, information on how you can take those raw recruits, those members that come into your church, and integrate them in such a way that they want to be a part of the fabric of your church, and not have the revolving door that so many experience when they baptize people and then in 6 months they don't know where they are. Attorney Doggett comes from a long line of Adventist preachers and family. We are just grateful for his presence this evening. And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to be able to present to you our presenter for this evening, Attorney Jackson Doggett. And I ask for him your undivided attention. Again, please mute yourselves. And then at the end, if you have any questions, place them in the chat. And I'm sure that Elder Doggett will be glad to address those. Elder Doggett, thank you so much for agreeing to participate and to pour into the lives of these very fine workers. The time is now yours, and may God bless you as you share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Donaldson. I want to first thank Dr. Donaldson for the opportunity to share tonight. I count it a privilege to be able to do all I can to pour into the lives of those who are ministering to the people of God. So I appreciate the opportunity. I also appreciate the words from our Vice President for Administration. I'm glad that he's here with us tonight. And it is my hope and prayer that when we finish this presentation, you will have gleaned something that's going to push your ministry forward and help you to be an even more equipped and effective worker for the Lord. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to do the presentation from there. So let me see. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
All right, something has disappeared. So let me try this.
There it is. There it is.
Now, how's that?
That's it.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to give you an agenda that we're not going to keep. So I already know that I have more material than I have time to give. It is my intention to at least touch on most of these subjects. We're talking about retaining the harvest. I'm pretty sure I'll get through the 2 assumptions, the 5 groups, and the 8 indispensable elements of the retaining the harvest system. I'm not sure how much further I will get, but when we get close to the time, Elder Donaldson can let me know when it's about time to do the question and answer. I will seek to at least brush over the other areas. There's a lot more than this, which is why I put my book up there on the agenda. Hopefully, Elder Donaldson will see that you get a copy. If not, that's how you can get it.
Yeah, we'll do that.
All right, great. So let's begin with 2 assumptions. The first assumption that I'm operating under is that the pastor is the leader, but the members do the work. The pastor is the leader, but the members do the work. If a leader is actually leading, that is work enough. It is often the case. I know when I first started in ministry, it was important to me that I, quote, succeed, close quote. And of course, through maturity, I learned God has not asked me to succeed. He's asked me to be faithful. And I leave the results up to him, but I have to be faithful to the call that he has given. And my belief is the primary role of the pastor is to cast the vision for the people, to spiritually feed the people, and to plan the work for the people, empower and equip the members so they can do the work. Now, the vision is always some version of this one thing, making disciples for Jesus Christ. We have spent a lot of time learning how to get baptisms. Jesus did say, go and baptize, but making disciples is the goal. Baptism is just a step in a person's spiritual journey. It is not the end of the relationship with Jesus Christ. So the pastor who wants to, quote, succeed, or put it the other way, be faithful, oftentimes will pick up work that belongs to someone else so that the program can go forward. But the leadership of the pastor is what the people need. And if done correctly, that's plenty work enough. That also means pastors, in my view, have to get comfortable with some things not going the way they wish they went, because you're relying on others to get it done. So we can talk about that more if you have some questions in that regard, at least to what my philosophy is on that. But the assumption that I operate under this retaining the harvest system is, number one, the pastor is the leader, the members do the work. The pastor, of course, casts the vision, he spiritually feeds, he plans the work, he empowers people and equips people to get the work done. But that's where he spends his time. The second assumption is that the church wants to grow. if you're going to grow a church, the membership is going to have to need to want to grow. And what I have discovered in my ministry, most small churches have no intentions of growing. They will always say, we want to grow, we want to grow, we want to grow. But they will also say in the next breath, I joined this small church because I like small churches. And if a membership has the idea, we want this to stay small and intimate, you're going to have a very hard time growing the church because the influential leaders will sabotage your efforts. And that's not anecdotal. I've experienced that. But the two assumptions are you want to grow and the pastor is leading and the members are doing the work. So there are 5 groups in every church. This is not original to me. There is the community. The definition of the community that I'm using is those who have never interacted with your church. So now, especially that we're sequestered, it's the whole world. Since we're on the internet, your community is the whole world. In a real sense, once we're back in our buildings, the community is a radius around the church plus the whole world. But there is the community. These are people who have not ever interacted with your church, and you want to get them involved so that they can get to know Jesus Christ. So that's a group that you have to deal with. The second group is the crowd. The crowd are those who come occasionally. They might be members and they might not be members, but they show up. They'll show up for Easter. They'll show up for Thanksgiving. They'll show up for a Christmas service. They'll show up for homecoming if you have it, but you don't really see them very often. That's the crowd. The congregation are those who attend regularly, whether they are members or not. They're your regular attenders. You pretty much can count on them when you show up. They're in your Zoom church. They're in the live stream. They're going to be there. That's your congregation. Then there's the committed. The committed, those are members who are actively engaged in ministry. Actively engaged in ministry, whether they are members or not. These are people who are actively engaged, whether they're members or not. And then the final group that you have is the core. These are members who are leading ministry. So these 5 groups of people are in your church, and it's important that you attend to each one with the goal of moving them along to leadership. Now, the community, then, you want to become the crowd. You want the crowd to become the congregation. You want the congregation to become the committed. You want the committed to become the core. You will find fluidity because the core, those members who are leading, are from time to time, because of life circumstances, going to have to rest a while, like Jesus told his disciples to do. So there's going to be fluidity among these 5 groups. People will find themselves, once they become a part of the crowd, they may drift between crowd and core and back again. But you have them there, and you want to move them along in your congregation so that they are more and more engaged in the mission of the Church of Christ. In order to keep them, you've got to have a nurture system that prevents people from falling through the cracks. I've been to churches where one of the most influential members got sick and was not at church for about 6 months. When they got back, they were hurt because nobody called them, nobody visited them. It seemed that nobody missed them. But this happened because there was no system in place to make sure that nobody could fall through the cracks, especially somebody who was a committed member. So you have these groups, and you're going to have to find ways, and in the book I talk about some ways to do it, but to nurture them, to move them along, to make sure they're getting more and more deeply involved with Jesus Christ and his mission for the church. Now we're going to talk about the system itself for the rest of the time. I start with my conclusion. The church is focused on reaping the harvest of souls through baptism, but very, very little attention is given to retention. We know that for about every 23 seconds, a new member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is baptized around the world, somewhere around the world, about every 23 seconds. We also know that approximately 49% of them are going to leave the church, never to return. There's a larger number that leaves the church. And in a very short period of time, I had the privilege, one of my very first assignments when I was first hired in 1979, was to do a consulting job for the Southern California Conference. Every year, George Rainey, some of you may know him, a great evangelist, every year he would have a tent meeting, and every year he would baptize more than 100 people, every year. But every year, by the time the next meeting came around, there were literally 10 to 20 of those members who were still in churches somewhere. So I was asked to go around, and actually for a summer, I spent my time going to talk with all of the people who had left in a particular summer tent meeting. They had left the church. So I actually went to their homes, sat in their homes, and talked to them about why they left. Did they still believe the doctrines? Yes, they did. Did you understand what you accepted when you came into the church? Yes, they did. Well, then why did you leave? They gave three primary reasons. Number one, the pastor was not the evangelist. In other words, they had a relationship. They felt they had a relationship with the evangelist, but then they were led to a local church and they did not know the pastor. So the problem was the transition, getting a connection from the evangelist to the pastor. So that was the first problem. The second problem was their church was nothing like the tent. The second biggest reason they left was the church was nothing like the tent. When they came to the tent, they had people who would usher them to their seat. They would give them a Bible. They would make sure that they had the quiz cards. In fact, the Bible instructors would go visit them during the week. If necessary, they would get a ride to the meeting. But then when they got to the church, the excitement of the tent wasn't at the church. Because George Rainey would have Little Richard actually at his tent meeting singing gospel songs and whatnot. So when they got to the church, it was much less exciting. Few people paid any attention to them. And then the third reason, and the main reason that they actually left, was that they had no friends in the new church. And I had person after person literally say to me, I went back to my church because that's where my friends were. I believe the seventh-day Sabbath. I believe about the second coming. I believe about the state of the dead. I believe all of those doctrines the Seventh-day Adventist Church teaches, but I had no friends in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And after a while, I just drifted back to where I did have friends. And now I have more biblical information, but I also have a spiritual community where I feel a part of the community. So it is important that we focus on retention. And this whole system will help that. There is pain that we all feel, and it sometimes drives us to go for the baptism, and we need to go for the baptism. We don't baptize enough, in my view, but we need to go for the baptism. But one of the pain points is when we're trying to grow a church, we have slow growth or no growth. when we're trying to get the finances of the church, it's slow. Trying to have ministry impact, and it's sometimes hard. And even in these times, it's even a little bit harder because of the distancing and whatnot, and slow or no community impact. And we're looking for answers. And what I am watching is a lot of people are seeking to have a lot of activity through events, but it's not connected so much to growing disciples as it is to trying to pull together a crowd. So I'm saying it's important that we know where we want to focus so we know what it is we're trying to achieve. Where does this system fit? Well, when I originally wrote the book, I intended for it to fit in our typical system of evangelism. There's pre-work. So the system is designed to give you the pre-work. Then you have the evangelistic effort. And there's a whole science to the evangelistic effort. But then there's the follow-through for retention. That's how I intended that this system would be. But what I've discovered, the system is the whole thing. My father taught me that you can grow a church without ever having a formal evangelistic meeting. My father's gift was not the gift of doing evangelistic meetings. He did them. But he would grow his churches without meetings more than he grew it with meetings, because he had a system in place. He had a process in place that would attract people, engage people, and grow people. So that's what I'm wanting to share with you, that kind of concept. I think it's important that we reimagine how we do church now, because especially with COVID-19, we have an unprecedented opportunity to up our game, if you will. We are used to doing church a particular way. We're used to doing building-based ministry. In other words, we have a church building and everything we do is done there at the building. So our focus is getting people to come. So we do whatever we can to get the people to come and participate. I'm suggesting we have to shift to a people-based ministry. In other words, whether we have a building or not, we have a way to create community so we can influence people to become disciples. And I'm learning that pure digital ministry is insufficient. We are going to have to find a way to have personal contact. And that doesn't mean we have to have the crowds in the building. That means we're going to have personal relationships and teach our members to have personal relationships with people so that they can influence them in discipleship. And we have a wonderful opportunity to reimagine how we do that. We can go past what we find in the church manual and how we're supposed to structure, and now think. I don't like the term think outside of the box. I like the term just think. So we can reimagine with the guidance of the Holy Spirit to do this better than we've ever done before in making disciples. Jesus did not say, come make disciples. He said, go make disciples. And often in a building-based ministry, our focus is to get people to come. But Jesus says go, which means we have to find ways to interact with the people where they are, but we have to have a focus of being a disciple maker. A true disciple is faithful to Jesus' teachings. So we know when we're succeeding in making disciples is because people are being faithful to Jesus' teachings. The second thing we know about a disciple is they exhibit God's love as a character trait. A true disciple exhibits God's love as a character trait, not as a profession. Now, I put this picture here intentionally. Is God's love for you personal or professional? We can put on the Christian air, but not be Christian. We can pretend to love, but not really love. A disciple is like God. God does not love, God is love. And a disciple reflects that love of Christ. And then, of course, a true disciple is fruitful. The fruit of a disciple is another disciple. The fruit of a disciple is another disciple. So that's what we're focusing on. So this system prioritizes retention and ministry engagement. Retention and ministry engagement, and it adopts a team-driven approach to ministry. Typically, a church focuses on maintaining what exists. What do I mean? We open the church manual and we make sure everything in that church manual is running well in our church. I say this all the time. I hope I don't get in too much trouble for saying it, but I believe it. Most churches do not have the resources to function like the manual says function. That does not mean to say don't follow the manual. What I do mean to say is very few churches have the resources to have 28 ministries. They just don't have the resources. And if you're a small church, you really don't have the personnel or the finances to effectively run 28 ministries, which means we have to pare down based on God's leading what we try to do with what's in our hand so the Lord can grow that and then we can add to the ministry. But typically every church I've ever pastored over 40 plus years is they want to make sure someone is in the office of every ministry written in the manual. Even if that means one person has to have 5 leadership positions, we want to make sure we vote somebody into every one of them. I'm suggesting to you that the manual does not require that you have all of those ministries. And if you just have to have all those people on the board, the manual allows for you to put as many people on the board as you want. They don't have to be ministry leaders to be on the board. So if that's the issue, which it often is, you don't have to have a ministry leadership position to be on the board. I may touch on the board a little bit later. More than likely, I won't have time to do it, but I have a lot to say about that. The retention system is the retaining the harvest system is prioritizing retention and ministry engagement, as well as a team-driven approach. So there are 8 indispensable elements of this process, and let's start talking about those. The first one is fulfilling experience. What am I saying? When we were in our buildings, the very first thing any visitor would see would be your physical plant. That's the first impression they get of your church, your members, and of your God. Whatever the church looked like, outside and inside, that's the first thing that they would see. The second thing that they would see would be the people. Often, no one would be in the parking lot to greet them and show them which door to go in. Typically, no one's at the front door to help someone to find the sanctuary. They just come on in, and we usually would greet somebody either in the vestibule or inside the sanctuary itself. But the second thing people would see would be the people. The third thing, and the thing that made them decide whether they were coming back or not, is the experience they were having. Most churches don't think about what experience should people have when they come to this church. What should they come away with so that they want to come back? Disney, restaurants and any good business intentionally creates the experience that their clientele want. You will never be all things to all people. No matter how welcoming your church, everybody in your city is not going to be attracted to your church. But your church does have a clientele if you create the experience, because that's the experience that they want. Let me just give an example we all can relate to. Different ethnic groups prefer different styles of worship. Whatever that style is helping to produce the experience the worshiper is having. If you are intentional about what that experience is, there is a clientele for that experience. Ultimately, we want all of our churches to have the membership know that when they have left the service, they have been with God. Absolutely. But how a person feels that they have been in the presence of God is often cultural or existential. In other words, what they have grown up to believe is an experience with God is what they're looking for, and how they get there. It can grow over time, but there is something in their mind about, I know I have seen God win. So you create that experience. So that's the first thing, a fulfilling experience. That's got to be part of your formula, as it were, to attract, engage, and keep people. I'm going to say another thing. Since we have all been thrust online, I've been watching various worship services. Some people do it better than others, but I'm going to make a few suggestions. Number one, the online experience is a different experience than if you were in the room. People are used to watching television, which means they are used to watching a good production. Most of us do not have the resources to produce a great production. We don't have the people, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the programming, we don't have the studio, and if we have to be in different places, we don't have the expertise to make it come off like it's a flawless program. That's not a problem if the experience is enough for people to feel they have been with God and connected with you. So that means I'm suggesting going forward, I'm predicting the longer we're in this situation where we have to be online, the more we're going to shift from preaching to speaking conversationally. From preaching to speaking conversationally. That means people are going to want to interact with you as you are teaching the gospel. We're used to the proclamation. We're going to have to get used to the conversation. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to let everybody on Zoom unmic and talk, but you may have to find ways for them to be able to get in the chat or something like that, and there actually be some interaction, even if it's not you. If you've decided that I'm going to preach, because that's my gift, fine. Who's going to answer the questions that may be coming up in the chat? Who's going to ask or put out the question for conversation? Maybe not in the service, but after the service. There's got to be a way to connect with the people who are viewing us. And what I've seen is a lot of people just try to do what they were used to and just throw it online. And sometimes it works. Most of the time it doesn't work. And the only people who are really, really watching are the people who are diehard with your ministry. And the problem is now they don't have to watch you. They can watch anybody because they can go to church anywhere in the world without leaving their living room. So connection is extremely important in creating this experience that you want people to have so that they keep coming back for more and more of that. Number two, there has to be dedicated personnel who are managing the system. Now, the book lays out the system. I may not be able to do it very intricately tonight. I know I won't, but I will give you the broad strokes. But in those broad strokes, there are 6 teams that do 6 specific things. And if you don't have dedicated personnel, at least 2 per team, hopefully more, who are dedicated, the system is going to be weak. It'll work somewhat, but it won't work at its maximum. So the second element that really needs to be there is dedicated personnel. And this personnel should be the best you have. It would be worth pulling somebody off of something else to be involved in this system because it will attract and engage, and as a result, keep the people that you are baptizing. So we will get to it in a little while. Number 3, there needs to be a means to attract the people. This cannot be, I see often someone will get a good idea and run with the idea, and then the event is over, and then they say, what can we do next? And then we get another good idea and we run with that idea, and we're happy when it seems to have come off very well, but we don't follow through. Then we say, well, we've got to do something else to get the people here. And you come up with another. There has to be a systematic approach to attracting people. I put these pictures of the health clinic and the food drive because that's something, if you're meeting a need, you will attract the people. If you're meeting a need, you will attract the people. People do exactly what they want to do and nothing else. I believe that. So if you're meeting a need, they will show up. But you have to have a plan for what to do when they show up. What if a person from the crowd, never been to your church before, comes to your food drive and gets a bag of food? What have you done to attract them to your online prayer service or whatever it is you're doing? There has to be a follow-up and a purpose even beyond just meeting the need. Christ's method works. He mingled among the people. He showed compassion. He met their needs so he could win their confidence. Then he said, follow me. That works. But he had a method to his madness so that it actually led to something. Some of us have strong independent programs, and often it's the feeding program, and it doesn't lead beyond the food. What I'm saying is there has to be a means to attract the people, but then there has to be a follow through. And the way, in my opinion, that you make sure that you're not just simply having event after event after event is to plan everything out on your calendar a year in advance. What is it that we are going to do? All right, we're going to have, I'll just use this, homecoming. It's going to be a week-long celebration. We're going to do whatever we're going to do. But the question is, why are you having it and what's next? Because you want to be leading people into deeper and deeper relationship with Christ as they get in a deeper and deeper relationship with the people at the church. Hopefully I'll be able to expound more about that, but you need a means to attract the people. Then you need some tools. The first tool I put in the book is brochures. Brochures don't work so well now because nobody's at your church, but the information is still necessary. And there's 6 brochures or 6 pieces of information I think you need to develop. Number 1, how to become a member at your church. There ought to be a clear path to membership. I used to do this when I would do presentations. I would ask the people in the church, and this would be an Adventist church, tell me what happened. What were the steps you took to become a member of this church? And if there were 20 people in there, there were at least 10 different ways they came in. I had to take all of the amazing facts, and then I had to wait X amount of time. That's how I was baptized. Another person, I was at a tent meeting. I didn't take any studies. They gave the appeal, and the next day I got baptized. And then there's someone else. So there was no real consistency to how people come into the church. And therefore, sometimes no real connection to the church because they didn't study what the church believed. Jesus himself said, you got to count the cost before you start to build. So they weren't taught what it is they were getting into, so they didn't feel an obligation to stay. Now, I'm not one of those who feels like you have to have 21 lessons and then 6 months of stewing. And I believe that a person does, though, need to know if you're going to join this church. Step one, you have to let us know, and here's how you let us know. Step two, this is what you can expect from us. Step three, this is what the experience you have to go through. Step four, you have to be baptized by water immersion. Step five, we have to vote you into the, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be long and drawn out, but it needs to be clear. How do I join the church? And that information ought to be readily available at all times, because you should be making appeals at every occasion. You should be making appeals for people to accept Christ and to join the church at every occasion. If you're having prayer meeting, you don't know who's on the prayer line, or you don't know who's going to see it once it's set up there on Facebook or YouTube or wherever it's sitting. Every occasion, you need to make an appeal to accept Jesus Christ as Savior and to join our church. And to get more information about how to join our church, go to and have the information someplace where people can access it so they know the path. I'm going to say that again later on. Secondly, you need a brochure or the information on baptism. Once I've made the decision to be baptized, now what? What does baptism mean? How do you do baptism here? When is baptism? My opinion is I would always do this. I put baptism on the calendar every month, whether I had anybody to baptize or not, because I wanted it in front of the people that what we're here to do is make disciples. And one of those important steps to making disciples is to baptize. So people need to know what it is. How do you do it here? How can I participate? How do people spiritually grow at your church? What is your program for spiritual growth? You should be able to articulate that in writing. How do you join a ministry at the church? It's a mystery to people. They come in and they want to get involved, but they don't know how to get involved. It ought to be spelled out. If you want to join a ministry, here's how. These are the ministries that are available. Here's what the commitment is to be in this ministry. And I personally believe in a short application process so they can say, I want to join this ministry. Here's why. Here's some skills that might be helpful. Not something like a job interview or something, but something that shows them there is a commitment involved in ministry. And I would do a short interview with them, not in depth, just to get their commitment. Let them know, here's what the time commitment is likely to be per week. Here's what the expectation is of a person who's involved in this ministry. So it's clear to them what the commitment is that they're making. What I have found is when you do that, you have stronger commitments and less attrition. Then how to become a leader at the church. People want to lead, but they don't know how to become until they see the first election cycle, and then they figure it out. Oh, I have to know that person to be able to get my name in the nominating committee so I can become a leader. Leadership should be open to everybody, and there should be some leadership training for everybody. Everybody's not going to become a leader, but it ought to be available. They ought to know how it happens at your church. And then finally, how do you start a ministry at the church? To me, those 6 brochures are very important. When I say brochures again, you want to write it out. You want it to be available in several formats: written, digital, video, available from social media. You've got to make information about these things accessible. On your website, there ought to be links: how to join the church, how to be baptized, how to join a ministry, how to become a leader. There ought to be links so people can know if that's an aspiration, here are the commitments that I must make. Number 5, there has to be a way to keep track of people. Now, Adventist is great for reporting baptisms and reporting who a ministry leader is. In my view, it's not very good as a church management system. You can have an analog system. You could have 3x5 cards to know where the people are. And I believe you ought to know which group, which of those 5 groups every person is on your church roll. Everyone. Some are in the, once they're on your roll, of course, they wouldn't be in the crowd. They'd be in the community. They'd be in the crowd, or they'll be in the congregation, or they'll be in the committed, or they'll be in the core. But you ought to know every single person where they are in that matrix, so that you know how to nurture them to the next spot. You could do it with 3x5 cards. You could do it with a database. There are all kinds of ministry management systems out there, Ministry Tracker, Faith Life, and there are a whole lot of others. But you need something to keep track of the people so you know how to nurture them. And we'll come back to that. Number 6, a pathway from guest to leader. What I mean by that is what I was talking about. A person needs to really understand how I just came into your building. I don't know the people. I don't know your church. I just know I'm interested. And now, of course, it's online. So I've stumbled on your link. I'm in your Zoom worship service. How do I get involved with your church? You've got to have a clearly marked path so people know, oh, if I want to go, get in a Bible study group, here's how I do it. If I want to participate in the prayer meeting, here's how I do it. If I want to become a member or at least find out some more about the church, here's how I do it. You've got to have a clearly marked out path. And I'm going to say this now, I may say it again. The pastor needs to be the one to take the lead on marking out this path. You can let the members tweak it and make it better, but you need to mark out the path. These are the waypoints to go from, I just came in as a guest, to now I want to lead a ministry. You should know what those waypoints are. Number 7, a method to prevent people from disappearing. That's the nurture group, and we'll talk more about that. But all along the way, people can easily disappear, especially now, because if you don't have a way to track who's involved in your church right now, who's coming to your worship service, who's coming to your prayer service, who's participating, who's interested, who has needs, who's not involved at all, who's not showing up at all, What can we do to minister to what their needs are so they don't feel like they're simply obligated to be on the Zoom call because we call the Zoom call? You've got to have a method for nurture. Then, of course, number 8, a team approach. A winning team has certain characteristics. Number 1, they have a clear philosophy. Number 2, they have a single goal. Now, we do a whole lot of things, but there's really one goal in every church: to make disciples. To make disciples. And it's a relational thing. A winning team has a game plan. There's a plan. It doesn't just happen. There is a plan. And when things aren't going right, you adjust the plan so you can achieve the goal. A winning team has mutual cooperation. It is impossible to cooperate if there is no goal. I paused for emphasis. People can't cooperate with what you're trying to achieve if it hasn't been articulated. You've got to articulate the goal. Then you can get mutual cooperation. A winning team has a specific individual assignments, and a winning team has the ability to adapt to changing conditions. Players on a winning team should be carefully selected. We want any and everybody to serve, but any and everybody is not the right person for any and every function. So that's a whole topic in itself. In the church, I learned this the hard way. Talent is not the qualifier for leadership in the church. Talent is not the qualifier. It's great when you have talented people, but that's not the qualifier. I had the unfortunate experience of helping to put some talented people in leadership positions in the church, and they tore the church up. Here's why. They didn't have the growing relationship with Jesus Christ that we all thought they had. So the biggest qualifier for leadership in God's church is spiritual maturity. In other words, I have a growing relationship with Jesus Christ, a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. I can learn what I need to do to get the work done, but character is indispensable. And when you start picking your leadership team, particularly for this work, because I'm going to talk about some of the things to expect that are going to happen if you try to institute this. I ran across it every time. You've got to have people on your team who have a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, here are the 6 teams. Here are the 6 teams. It's in the book, so I'm not going to get too involved with it to kind of keep our time. Here are the 6 teams. The nurture team, their full-time job is to love people. Nurture team. A team got skipped. We'll catch it though. Somehow I deleted a team. Community outreach team. Attract them. Membership team. Befriend them. Ministry development team. Engage them. And leadership team, train and empower them. So let's look at them. I have all 6 here. My recommendation is based on the church manual so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think that on the nurture team, elders, deacons, deaconess, greeters, and ushers are the people whose pretty much full-time job is to love people. So my recommendation is that you help those 5 ministries come together to formulate a plan for making sure nobody who comes to your church can possibly fall through the cracks. You love everybody and they feel it. The contact tracking team really is about tracking contacts. So the clerks are the natural people to actually do that. So that's who I recommend be on that particularly team. So the contact tracking team is a team I accidentally deleted from the other slide. But contact tracking team, clerks, just to keep track of where people are, who came to what commitment have they made, what's their next step in the growth and engagement in the church, what's the next thing they should be doing, is it time for them to join in on a ministry someplace. So you've got a game plan for moving people from being part of the community all the way to leadership, but you've got to track them. Then the community outreach team, I suggest, is the board, because the church manual says the primary job of the church board is evangelism. The primary job is evangelism. We've made it every other job, but the primary job is evangelism. Again, I'd love to take the time to just do a full presentation on the board, but I don't have that time tonight, so I won't take it. Membership team, Bible instructors and/or Sabbath school teachers. Now, I said Bible instructors, even though most churches don't have Bible instructors anymore. Conferences, for some reason, have decided we don't need to have Bible instructors. But I think Bible instructors, anybody who has ever done evangelism knows that you can almost dispense with the evangelistic meeting if you have good Bible workers, because they're going to find the souls, they're going to prepare the souls, and then you're going to baptize those souls. The Bible workers are the key to an evangelistic meeting. Any evangelist knows this. So why we don't have Bible instructors all the time is beyond me. Now, I'm not talking about the conference paid Bible instructor. I'm talking about volunteer Bible instructors that you might give a little stipend to for gas, but now it's not gas. Maybe you pay for their Zoom so they can get people on Zoom or something. Or if you don't pay them at all, okay, fine. But Bible instructors, if you don't have them, the next natural person to be this person is the Sabbath school teacher. Because if every adult and every child is in a Sabbath school class or assigned to a Sabbath school class, there you have a built-in natural Bible study situation. Again, that could be a whole presentation on its own. Ministry development team, I recommend to be the standing nominating committee. Now, there's no such thing as a standing nominating committee in the church manual. I'm suggesting that you allow the nominating committee to continue to do its work so that their goal would be every member engaged in ministry. So they come up with ways to recruit every member into ministry. And even the people who are constantly involved in your church, and recruit them in ministry too, where they can come in and come alongside and get engaged. But that's a recommendation. And then for the leadership training team, that is, who's going to train leaders to lead? My view is the pastor is the primary facilitator for that. If the pastor is not equipped to do the training, the pastor should make sure that the training is done. In my view, it is so important that a person should not be allowed to remain in leadership if they do not participate in leadership training. That may be harsh, but I've learned through the years, when a person is not committed to become better at what they're doing, it's going to start going backwards. I would prefer to have fewer ministries led by dedicated, growing leaders than to have a lot of ministries that aren't really functioning. That's just me. So now let's talk about 6 expectations, and I doubt I'll even get through them. But Elder Dr. Donaldson will let me know whether I have the time or not. But here are 6 expectations. If you attempt to institute the Retaining the Harvest system in your church, the very first thing you should expect to happen is the members will resist it. That has happened 100% of the time when I first begin to institute the Retain the Harvest system in a church. Resistance. And it's not because people don't necessarily see the value of it. It's because change is hard for many people. So you're going to get resistance. What can you do about it? Refocus the people on the reason the church exists. Refocus the people on the reason the church exists. Members get comfortable with routine, and sometimes we forget why we're doing the routine. I tell a story about, someone told me this story that there was a family that whenever they cooked a pot roast, they would cut off the ends of the roast. And one of the children one day asked, because it didn't make sense to them, there's plenty of room in the pot, why are you cutting the ends off? And their parents did not know why they did it. That's just the way they did it. So they asked their parents, why is it that when you cook the pot roast, you would cut the ends off? And their parents told them the only reason we cut the ends off was because our pot was too small and the roast wouldn't fit in it. So we would cut the ends off. But the child saw that, got comfortable with that. They thought that's the way it's supposed to be done, and they passed it on. That's what happens in a lot of churches. We just do what we do because we've always done it, and we're not really sure why we do it or why we do it that way. We just know this is how we do it. So you're going to get resistance. You got to refocus the people on why the church exists, and you do that through sermons. You do that through discussions with leadership. You do that through discussions with influential people that do not have leadership positions, but they are leaders in your church. You do that, like Jesus said, to teach the children, by the way, in the way, when you get up, when you sit down. You've got to refocus people on why the church exists. And then you can say, now, the reason we are trying to institute this process for attracting, engaging, and keeping people is because we are here to make disciples. And then I recommend, of course, that you give all these influential people a copy of the book so they can go through it themselves. They can dissect it. They can think about it. They can come up with a better way to do it in your context because it's flexible. This is not a rigid system. It's a flexible system that can be tailored to a context. So I recommend you give them the book. You have to map out the changes that need to happen at the church in order for things to work to attract, engage, and keep people. But I recommend that you give the members the flexibility in how they implement the changes. So you're specific about what the change needs to be, but they can put their input on how to do the change, and then the resistance goes away. So they know why they're doing what they're doing, why we're talking about making this change. That is biblical. We're not going against the church polity. We're not going against God. We're actually getting more in line with God to love the people and bring them into discipleship with Jesus Christ. Okay, here's what we need to do. Now, members, you got to help me with how we get this done. And let them work it out, because when they own it, they'll protect it. If you just try to give it to them, it's not theirs, it's yours. So that's one way to overcome this resistance that you will get. Secondly, you've got to be focused on every part of the system. There's always a strong part and a weak part, because people are shifting somewhat what their emphasis and focus is within their ministry. They're not used to doing it. What deacons are used to making sure that they're engaging with other people so that those other people know that they're loved. Deacons are used to cleaning the church and picking up the tithe and giving out communion. And that's not to put deacons' work down. What I'm saying is deacons have a routine that they're used to, and you're asking them now to pick up this nurture thing, to make sure nobody falls through the crack, to go beyond simply receiving the tithes and offerings and actually knowing the people who are putting the money in the plate. So it requires you got to focus on every part of the system. There are 6 teams. You got to know what's happening in all 6 of those teams. And we can talk about ways to do that. People have to work together. It's not this ministry versus that ministry. It's the whole church ministry trying to achieve something as a well-oiled machine. I recommend an orientation meeting so that everybody knows what this is all about. And then, of course, giving them time to think it through, to ask questions, to push back, because you already have mapped out what needs to change to be able to be more effective. You're going to give them the opportunity to say how to implement, but you've got to map out what the changes need to be. And then there are more things, but let me move on. Everyone must understand what the others are doing. So you can't have 6 teams working in isolation. It's 6 teams on one big team. So then you got to utilize the annual calendar. I go into it a little bit deeper in the book about why you need to have your personal calendar worked out before you work out your church calendar. Your personal calendar needs to be worked out before you work out your church calendar, but then you blend them so that you're not a workaholic and not able to take care of your family and all of that. So I go into that in the book a little bit more. But the annual calendar is important, and I put 2021 up there because right now we all should be working on what's going to happen in 2021. If we're still trying to figure it out week to week, we're way behind on the curve. We need to be looking at what is going to happen in 2021. Now, I know one of the things you might be saying is we don't really know what's going to happen because we don't know if we're going to be in the building, if we're going to have to continue to do this. Whether you're in the building or online, there are some things that must happen. Got to baptize, got to do communion. You're having prayer meetings. You're doing something for young people. You're having worship services. You know that much. So how can you utilize what you know is going to happen in a way to actually impact the community, the crowd, the congregation, the committed, and the core? So there's plenty to work on, even in the uncertainty of whether or not it's going to happen from a building or from online. Because what I've said before, and I really believe, we can't just be a building-based ministry anymore, even when we go back. Ministry has changed forever, and I don't want to start my rant on that, but ministry has changed forever. We've got to now start working on how are we going to build community in our current context. Just assume it's going to be like this for a while and plan it. If you need to make adjustments, you can make adjustments, but the calendar needs to really be planned. And then the most important element is constant prayer. Constant prayer. There needs to literally be a prayer team that's praying for the system, the Retaining the Harvest system. If you choose to implement it, you need people who are praying, Lord, help it to work. There are 6 teams that we're working with, and help every one of those teams to be effective. Help us to reach the people that you have put in our sphere of influence so we can make disciples of them just as you have ordained. You've got to bathe it in prayer, because Satan is going to do everything he can do to tear up your good intentions. Everything he can do. And what the devil means for your harm, God always means for your good. I learned that from Joseph. When his brothers were trying to kill him, God let him go through all he went through in order that he would wind up where he could do the most good. So constant prayer. Now I'm going to touch very lightly on some other things. You probably said this was very light, but there are 5 considerations that you're going to eventually bump into. Number 1 is pruning the tree. In other words, things grow better when you prune them. What do I mean? Every one of us has a membership that's not the membership. In other words, we have a book of members, but then we have the real congregation. Some of those names should not be on your books. And frankly, the only ones that I say immediately should come off are those who are dead. They're dead. They're still on your books. Clean them off. They're not there. They're never going to be there. The second group would be those who have moved away and they can't come back. But in this situation, doesn't matter where they are in the world, you could get them back in fellowship because you're doing it online. So pruning the tree has to be contextual. So you're looking to appropriately remove people to get the right picture, a true picture of what you're really working with, so you know exactly how to use your resources. A lot more I can say there, I'm not. Homecoming. For me, homecoming should be an annual event in every church because it gives you an opportunity to gather everybody who's a member of your church, even if they've haven't been coming in years. You can gather them together to give them a vision for where their church is going and to invite everybody to join in the vision. To me, that's the whole purpose of homecoming. You can have all kinds of events, things that they love to do together, but the purpose of homecoming for me is to cast a vision for where the church is going and then invite people to join the vision. And you work it out in such a way that they'd have a specific way they could join in your celebration. We need 2 more people on our nurture team, just 2 people who will be willing to call those who visit us and just tell them we appreciate it, that they came in and joined us, and we hope you'll join again. And then if you don't mind, from time to time, I'd like to just call and pray with you. We just need 2 people who would be willing to do it. You've got to make appeals all the time to pull people in, but homecoming to me is a way to gather people again, recast the vision, and get people involved in the vision of the church. Who should be a member? Again, you need to have a pathway to membership. Everybody is not going to be a member. Don't expect everybody to be a member because everybody's not going to vibe with your church. It's just that simple. But you should be able to attract and retain people intentionally. I was going to talk a little about the board configuration. It has a lot to do with some things, but I'm going to forego that. And I was going to talk about fundraising, but I'm going to forego that. But I will say this: money chases after great dreams and sound plans. And there's no shortage of money for the great dreams you have. There's usually just a shortage of sound plans. If you can put your plan on paper and share it with people convincingly, you will find the people who want what you're trying to achieve, and they will finance it. There's a whole lot more to that, but that's what I will leave that particular point. Mission statement. I believe every church should have one. Most churches don't have an effective one. A mission statement is what you are there to do. I'm not going to go into that now. If you ask me questions about it, I will go into it. But all I want to say is you got to have a plan. That's why you need a calendar. You've got to have a plan. You can't always be trying to catch up because you'll never catch up. Even if you have to go aside and rest a while to get the plan, you and God get together and what is it this church needs to do in the near future and going forward? What do we need to be focused on? What one thing must we accomplish? You've got to have a plan for it or it won't happen. That, I guess, is the main thing that I wanted to say about that. And I'm going to move right now, with the permission of Dr. Donaldson, into the questions at this point. There's a lot more. Dr. Cleveland taught me always have more to dispense than you give out. So I have a lot more I could say, but that's where it is. All right.
All right. Well, listen, first of all, thank you, Attorney Doggett, for that presentation. It was very, very rich, and we could see that there's some more things that will be of interest to this particular group. And to be respectful of your time, we're going to now have an opportunity for questions. I'm going to survey the chat, but if you have a question that you would like to ask Attorney Doggett verbally, now is the opportunity to do that.
I know there was a lot there, and yes.
Yes, thank you, Elder. I took a lot of copious notes. I know the book is there, but sometimes it's good to write things for yourself. That's the way I learn and internalize. I've been following your editorials, the articles that you share, you know, the 10 toxic things that you shared the other day, the 5 types of people, and, you know, the way that the past has become a precarious entity in this new normal, if it's at all new normal. Would you please kindly, with this deep information you've given that we'll get in the hard or soft copy, would you share your thoughts on the role of a pastor into the future? I get the retention piece, I get the nurturing piece, I get all that. But where do you see this phase, and what is it that you can share in this assembly that we need to be cognizant of, considerations or stuff like that? I hope I'm not too wordy. I hope you got what I was trying to say.
I'll repeat the question in my own words, and if I've got it right, then I'll answer it. You're asking, based on what's going on now and what I think is going to happen in the future, how should a pastor be functioning?
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay. In my view, the day of the megachurch in one big building is over, in my view. But you have more of an opportunity to have a megachurch now than you ever had before, because every home is a potential church. Every home in the world is a potential church. So in my view, we all are going to have to retool a little bit to learn how to lead huge numbers of people that don't need your personal attention, which to me is the definition of disciples making disciples. Jesus had a group of 70 disciples or more, but then he had an inner circle of 12, and even inside that circle, he had 3. So Jesus poured himself into a small group of people who went out, and the biblical record is they turned the world upside down. They took the gospel everywhere. We're going to have to readopt that, in my view, readopt that approach. Instead of trying to build up large gatherings of people once a week, we're going to have to figure out how to minister to huge numbers of people through other people. So disciple making has to become an art. Most Adventists I have observed have no idea how to make a disciple. They know how to get a baptism, but they don't know how to disciple people. And frankly, spending the time to disciple people can be very inconvenient, because you can't do it if you don't have personal relationships. And as a pastor, you cannot have personal relationships with hundreds of people. You cannot. Hundreds of people can be acquainted with you. You can be acquainted with hundreds of people, but there's only a small group of people that you're going to really be able to pour into. You can speak to thousands, but you will pour in like Jesus, pour into people. Only a few whose job it is to disconnect from that intimate relationship with you alone and start building it with somebody else so that they can pour that into someone who will then pour that into someone. I think we have to become professional at that. And most of us, that's not part of our training. We're trained to manage by church manual. That's our training. That's our orientation. But we've got to learn to be people-based where we're making disciples who are making disciples.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
I just had one. This is Pastor McGinney, Elder Dog. I was listening to your comments about the church calendar and planning ahead, which is something I try to do, but I got to be honest with you, it's been challenging given the new landscape and the uncertainty of the medium and the way we're going to do it. So trying to line things up and people up has been a changing, like shifting sand. So could you expand on how we can still be able to do that in a way that would be meaningful and feel some level of certainty that what we're planning is going to be a reality?
Well, two things I want to say. One is prayerfully discuss with God and come to a conclusion about what needs to happen. What is the goal of all your activities? What is the goal? Make disciples. Okay, now we know what. How can we do it in our current circumstance? None of us can predict the future unless God gives us a revelation. All we can be doing is guessing. So what we know what it is today. So what can we do today to move us toward the goal that we have? And we're going to stumble a little bit, but if we're focused on that, for instance, again, I'm going to say, there's some things that you definitely want to do. You want to make disciples, and part of that, people have to spiritually grow. So what can I do in this environment to help people spiritually grow, in relationship with other people? Once I know what that is, then I talk to people to figure out how can we do that. We know what we want to do, how are we going to do it, and what resources do we need to do it. So how much time do we need to plan it? What is our follow through after we have done it? Let's just take the services that we do every week. Most of us are doing prayer meeting, right? So what is the goal of prayer meeting? There's a goal. There has to be a goal. Most of the time it's, well, we're supposed to. That's not the reason you do prayer meeting. There's got to be a goal for prayer meeting. Prayer meeting doesn't have to be like everybody else's. Prayer meeting could be strictly prayer. But at the end of prayer, as a part of prayer, you're saying, look, we're looking to God to figure out what we're doing going forward. I need you to pray with me about that so God can help me to know what we need to do as a church to go forward and build up his kingdom. That could be the goal of prayer meeting until you figure that out. It could be Bible study. This is the place where we are going to help people to get spiritually strong, to reconnect to the core doctrines of the church and how those doctrines relate to our relationship with Jesus Christ. We're going to do that to grow the people. So you know how many weeks you're going to have to do that. You can start it later in the year. What I'm saying is you've got to prayerfully discover what, and God will put in your path how. And all of us are struggling with the technology. If what you need is somebody who can work out the technology for you, that's what you pray for. And God will put that person there. So now you don't have to worry about that. You've got that taken care of. That's the best I have at the moment. Did that help?
Yes, it did. It helped somewhat. And, and I think you're right. We just have to pray and just ask God to help us to find a path. Because normally, like you said, normally you think about what you need and what you're trying to achieve, and you're trying to tailor your calendar to try to get those things accomplished. And I guess the uncertainty for me will just be how I'm going to do it. I guess the topic or what I'm trying to do won't change, I guess is what you're saying. That certainty is going to be there no matter what. It's just a question of the methodology going to be utilized to accomplish it. So, yeah.
That and one other thing. I think most pastors try to do too much. Most pastors try to do way too much. And
They didn't hear you, Elder Doggett, so repeat that.
Most pastors try to do way too much. And the reason most of the time is people are pushing you to do it. Pastor, we need. Pastor, we need. Pastor, we need. And you're trying to meet the need. It is vital that if you only do one thing well, do one thing well. And when you've got that working, go to the next thing and do that well. So now you've got two things working well. We try to keep all the balls in the air, and we're not capable of doing it because we must rely on the people to get it done. And if they're not doing it, it will not be done. I don't care how much praying you do. If the people aren't doing it, it's not getting done. But there are certain things God counts on you to do, and you cannot give it to someone else. And the first thing is you've got to spiritually feed the people. If you're doing that well, God can guide you, and he'll bring people alongside you to get the next thing done. But don't try to do too much. Don't try to fill the calendar with activity. Activity does not always equal progress. In fact, most of the time, it doesn't equal progress.
Well, sometimes you have to, I have a lot more activities going on now because with this lack of interaction personally, to keep everybody engaged and feeling in fellowship, we have a little bit more engaging things that go on to get that feel of togetherness, because in this environment, hopefully I'm not doing too many things, but we try to keep them engaged, if you know what I mean.
Yes. And my question to you would be, are you feeling you have to be at everything?
Well, no, I'm blessed to have some people that are heading up other things. I just try to make sure there's things going on though.
Okay.
No, I'm not heading up everything. I got some young people that are doing it. I just try to make sure that there are things for them to do that are happening, for them to interact and to use their spiritual gifts, so that during the week we don't lose them, and then Saturday go, where are they? Because they done got disconnected. So that's it.
Here's something else I think we're going to have to get comfortable with. Everybody's not going to come to a church service at 11 o'clock on Sabbath anymore. You're recording it, and they're getting it. One of the things I think we all should learn to do as podcasts is something I need to do, because people are more likely to listen to 5 minutes of your daily worship than they are to come to your worship service. So I would say, I know the pressure you feel because you're trying to keep a group together, but if you could keep groups together, that is to say, young people are grouping together and you know that there's somebody who's influencing them spiritually so that they are in fact growing, but they may not be meeting at the same time everybody else normally meets, because that's what has happened. Everything is fluid now. Nobody is bound to a specific time to do anything because the recordings are there. So we've got to kind of fold that into our thinking. that if we don't have 200 people watching the live stream of worship service, doesn't mean 10,000 didn't see it.
And that's so very true. We're finding it out. Like we may have 77 to 100 during the actual service. And then by the time you get to two, just like 300, 400, you're right. And you don't know how many people are in the home. So, and I'm finding also that demographic wise, we got about a consistent following of a large Latino group that's in other countries, South America, which is amazing. And you're right, you can't say it, 'cause I'm pretty sure their time zone is totally different than ours. So yeah.
Exactly. So don't fret over, I got to get the people to show up. They will show up if what you're offering is something that they want. And you need to find a way to connect with those people in the other country so that they really feel a part of your fellowship. Now, that doesn't mean you've got to organize, special meetings with them and all that, but it does mean there has to be a connection. So they feel a part, even if they do something for the service and you watch it the next day or in the evening or whenever you can, just give the link. But we are in an asymmetrical world now. We don't have to all do the same thing at the same time to get the same result.
Amen. Amen.
Hey, Elder Doggett, this is Pastor Torres.
Yes.
I think the situation with us is very unique. I guess our congregation, and I don't have that as much. I think everybody is pretty much engaged because I let them know I'm a volunteer pastor. That means that I have a job, and at the same time, I have to minister to every single one of you. So I'm not going to be able to do it all by myself. I think putting that distinction, or maybe putting, letting them know I'm just mainly like you, but God called me to do something. God called me for the ministry. I think making that will make most of our job or most of our ministries a little bit better if people understand that in a lot of ways we are just like our congregation, that we have a job, and we then now also have a ministry that God has called us to.
Right. And then my opinion is you pour into a few who can pour into others so that you duplicate yourself throughout the church.
Yep.
The
And
more
I have concentrated in like 8 or 10 because I know that my other 30 will not be willing to do what they're willing to do.
Right.
Okay. Excellent. Any other questions?
Just for my feedback, was anything I did this evening helpful to you?
Yes. Yes, it was. Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
I'll say, Dr. Doggett, I've read the book twice, and your explanations of things help clarify even the things that I've read twice. And so it's a dynamic book, and I use a lot of those principles in the church where I am.
Great, great. Well, that's what's important to me, that something possibly could improve as a result of our experience together. So I appreciate Dr. Donaldson giving me the opportunity.
Well, I want to say the comments, both in the chat and just in listening to you, Attorney Doggett, it's been a great blessing. And I think you touched on a subject and shared with us such practical and important concepts that can be immediately applied. I think it stirred up some thinking, and we'll press the treasurer to see if he would be kind enough to allow us to get the book in the hands of all of those who are on the line this evening. We really appreciate the time that you have taken and in sharing with us. And I'm sure as the men have an opportunity to kind of think and reflect, there may be some additional questions that may come up. And if so, I will certainly shoot those questions to you for you to be able to respond. Thank you so much for really sharing with us this evening. And I have read the book also, and I found it to be a great tool. And I thought that this would be the kind of information that would be extremely helpful. Now, none of us were anticipating, I think when I first engaged you, Attorney Doggett, we weren't anticipating COVID to happen, but so we would have had an opportunity to have interaction with this very fun group. But I immediately thought when reading the book that this would be some interesting and valuable information, and your presentation has just validated that. So we really appreciate what you have done. And tomorrow, I was just thinking just how good God is, just listening attentively to what you were sharing. Tomorrow, my presentation is really going to be almost like the other side of the coin to what you have been sharing, because I want to kind of go into a little bit more in depth as to how you move people from the various groups that you were talking about, from congregation into committed, into core, etc., by using leadership styles to be able to help develop people and move them along a continuum. So what you did was just extremely valuable, man, and plowed some land that I won't have to go over. So I personally appreciate what you did tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I put my email in the chat so you could get it from there if you want to, but certainly feel free to go through Elder Donaldson, Dr. Donaldson as well.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, thank you, those who are on our line this evening. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And Dr. Doggett, again, we thank you for sharing with us. Elder Palmer, thank you for staying with us. Any comments that you'd like to make before I make a few little housekeeping announcements and have closing prayer?
I just want to say what a informative and engaging presentation Elder Doggett gave. Thank you, Elder Doggett, for just really giving some really practical tools for ministry and for leadership in the church. And thank you for also venturing into the space of where we think the church will be in the future. I just want to affirm that church has changed, and anyone who's trying to get back to pre-COVID church is trying to go back to a path, go back to something that's not coming back. It's not coming back in the way that we knew it. Even when we return to the church, as it were, to using our buildings, people's worship patterns will have changed. And if we're not ready for that, if we've not prepared for that, if we've not thought about that, we're going to be finding ourselves irrelevant. So thank you, Attorney Doggett, for just advancing the discussion and for moving the ball forward. Appreciate that so much. Thank you, Elder Donaldson, for bringing such rich information to our volunteer lay pastors. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Vice President. We appreciate you being on and sharing with us. we're hoping that each one of you have a wonderful worship experience tomorrow with your congregations. Again, we're going to have the second presentation of our retreat. It's going to be at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And we're going to talk about developing disciples through transformational leadership. And I'm just excited because what Elder Doggett shared with us this evening will be a great springboard to us diving a little bit deeper into parts of the presentation tonight. So I look forward to seeing you now. So that there be no mix-up, please look at your email. There were 2 links. So this particular link that brought you to this service this evening is not the Zoom link that you'll use for tomorrow afternoon. If you go back to your invitation, you'll see that there are 2 Zoom links on there, one for Saturday Sabbath, one for Friday night Sabbath. And so make sure that you use the right link. We'll see you at 4 o'clock sharp, and we'll see what the Lord has in store for us as we go forward.